Okay, thank you everyone. So today we will be hosting, I'm hosting a panel entitled Gaming Alone will onboard the first billion users to Web3. Joining us today to explore the decentralized future of play, NFT-based gaming, and the crypto-native economy's role in onboarding the first billion users to Web3 is Kellyanne Perera. Kellyanne is International Vice President at Ape Squared Creative. We also have Fabio, Franca, founding partner of Blueverse Ventures, and in the middle is Robby Young, CEO of Animoca Brands. And I'll let everybody introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about what they're doing at the moment. My name's McGleenon, I'm host of Yahoo Finance's The Crypto Mile. So, let's get started. Is Web3 gaming, is it able to onboard the first billion users to Web3? What is the state of play at the moment? Are traditional gamers flocking to the blockchain-based gaming space? That's what I'm going to ask people. Kellyanne, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then give your take on that.
Oh, big question to start with.
Well,
I'll start with the easy bit of who I am. I'm International Vice President of Ape Squared. So Ape Squared, we're in development on a AAA open world metaverse / RPG, which is a role-play game. So we were previously in the world of feature film production, so very kind of high-end animation feature films, and we combined our feature film studio with our gaming division to start creating something that is AAA, which is a kind of, if people aren't gamers, it's sort of like a branding level of where your game sits, AAA being the very, very top, so that's in terms of graphics, in terms of gameplay and design, so it's the top end. And I know we're going to talk about the difference between kind of traditional gaming and Web3 gaming, but I look after all of our business outside of Asia. And I'm also one of the founders of an organization called Women Leading Web3, which is a networking membership collective for women in positions of senior leadership in the Web3 space. So we host events and just connecting. There's lots of women in those senior positions, but very interspersed, I suppose. So it's quite hard to find each other, so we just bring everyone together. So that's me. And the question.
Well, my question was like rather lengthy, but actually, just sort of specifically, are traditional gamers flocking to the blockchain-based gaming space?
No, I don't think so. Not yet. There's certainly a very big divide that still exists. I think when Web3, blockchain-based gaming, whatever you want to call it, kind of first started to come about, there was actually a bigger chance that gamers were going to be the ones that flocked or could bring the billion users to the metaverse. I think one of the big issues that happened that created this divide is a lot of those early games, blockchain-based games, branded themselves using the same kind of terminology that traditional gamers are used to, like AAA and things like that. And then they came to see these AAA Web3 games and found that they're not AAA and are very different to what a lot of traditional gamers look for, which is significant gameplay, perhaps, cinematics, graphics, or long storylines. And a lot of the early and still quite predominantly now Web3-based games are more of what we call play-to-earn games. So the gameplay isn't necessarily the focus. The earning potential is the focus. So you've got your traditional gamers, and this is obviously being very stereotypical, but you have your traditional gamers that want gameplay and not the kind of crypto earning side. And then you have Web3 players where the earning potential is the focus and actually quite detailed gameplay gets in the way of that.
Okay.
So I think until those two merge together a bit more, until we have big title games that are based on blockchain, or until maybe Web3 gamers come around, there already is a bit of a shift, what we now kind of call play and earn, rather than playing to earn. So the gameplay is a focus and the earning is an added benefit, but it's not the primary focus. So I think till that happens, there's not going to be...
Robby, just to come in there, do you think Web3 games are catching up with the AAA traditional games in terms of gameplay, in terms of graphics, in terms of playability, or is it still predominantly dominated by this earning potential aspect?
So I think first you have to put it in context. So the gaming world is a very sort of diverse and inclusive sort of landscape of different kinds of games. And if you wind the clock back about 15 years, we had console games, we had PC games, and that was basically how people played games. And then mobile came along. And mobile doubled the size of the game industry, but more importantly, increased the pool of players by about 4 billion people. So the majority of people play games on phones, actually, on mobile. And so when you think as a game developer about making games, you think about whether I'm going to make a cross-platform game or I'm making a game for a particular kind of gameplay style. Most AAA games historically have been for console because they're based on very high budget, kind of trying to simulate reality in terms of graphical quality, and it's a very specific type of game. In the same way that you can go to an IMAX version of a film, but you can also watch, something on Netflix at home, and those are two different types of media. So I think it's a little bit of a red herring to think about AAA games as being the gold standard of games. It's just one type of game. But when we think about mass adoption has to involve mobile, because that's where the 4 billion people are. And mobile is largely controlled by two companies in the world in terms of distribution. And so we, as the game players of the world, need to wait until those two companies allow us access to their platforms.
Could you expand on that now? So we're talking about, okay, these new games, these Web3 games, they don't need to compete with the kind of graphics you see in those AAA games, but they do also need to have gameplay, because that's why people play a game.
Of course.
So is the gameplay improving? And if so, can you give examples of titles or anything like that?
Sure, absolutely. So gameplay in Web3 games is no different than any other kind of game. The only thing is that you have the ability, because of the Web3 rails, to conduct transactions and have ownership and peer-to-peer transactions amongst users. But essentially, they're still games. The difference is that I think Web3 attracted a lot of attention because it's quite an innovative and new technology with a lot of potential. And people started to look at games being made with Web3 technology underneath, and they started to pass judgment on what those games were capable of. But in reality, making a great game takes a long time. And if you want to make a AAA game, you have to plan to have 3 years, right? Typically, maybe 4 to be able to make the game. And Web3 has largely only been in existence since the invention of the NFT, which was August of 2017. So we're a very young industry in terms of content in Web3. So I think what you've noticed is over the last 12 months, a lot of games of what we would consider traditional game quality have emerged onto the market. But those are games that started development back in 2019 and 2020. And so I think you'll see the pace of new game launches increasing parabolically because so many companies were funded in 21 and 22, and those products will start to emerge in the market over the next 24 months.
So Fabio, we're sort of talking about how we can onboard the next billion users to Web3 through gaming. Is that a very ambitious target? And what needs to happen within Web3 gaming to try and achieve that?
Sure. Quickly as a background, Blueverse is an emerging venture capital fund and advisor in the metaverse and emerging technologies. So to take a quick step back, and I'll come back to your question, but to take a quick step back, the metaverse, Web3 being the next generation of the internet. So we'll have different tools, different way of using our digital selves and our digital lives. So that's our investment thesis, if you like. Going back to Web3, Web3 is one of the moving parts of the ensemble of technologies which we expect will be the next generation of the internet, the next cyberspace, of which gaming is very important because we do have 1 billion gamers in the world. And Robby, I totally agree with you, not all gamers are the same. It's just like we're saying we are 3 billion, 6 billion people in the world where we have different tastes, different ways in gaming, different ways of gaming, different purposes. It's just we have all these players, and there is a cross-pollination between gamers and crypto people. I just said the C word, so well, let's go in there. So crypto has become toxic.
The audience is still here.
I know it's an AI conference, but so they do cross-pollinate, and they're very fluent and in using those technologies. But it doesn't mean all the gamers are crypto traders, or they have a wallet. Right. And I think there's a difference between, there's been an explosion of use case, such as Axie Infinity, which is a game that's exploded during the pandemic, and that opened the door, the Pandora box, to play to earn models and all these exciting tokenomics. And we've been very excited with all this concept, and that exploded into the mainstream, and the hype level went there. But like we said, it's very still a niche market, and it has a long way. So to go back to the question, how are we going to onboard the next billion users? Well, how did we onboard a billion users on the internet or on Facebook? Well, we needed an email. And we could have fun asking the question in the audience, how many people have an email? And everybody, show of hands, everybody raise their hands. And then you say, keep your hands up if you have a crypto wallet, and then you will see the difference. So the adoption of crypto wallets and understanding of Web3 is one of the challenges. And then I'm sure we'll come on to some other challenges.
Well, actually, no, I can't really see the audience because the light's shining in my face. But if anybody wants to put up their hand whether they have a Web3 or crypto wallet.
All right.
Okay.
Quite a lot.
Okay. So that is definitely one major aspect of adoption of Web3 and then Web3 gaming. So do you think that, Fabio, do you think that there's immense potential for Web3 gaming particularly to drive this adoption of digital ownership of Web3 or crypto wallets, and usage of tokenization and cryptocurrencies in general? Do you think that is the vector for mass adoption, or do you think there's other vectors that should be looked at?
I think it's one of them. I mean, in the business, we use the analogy with electricity a lot. When it's dark and then you want the light on, you just push the button, the light comes on. You don't really need to understand, how the grid is working in the city to actually have the light in your room. I think Web3 is a bit the same. Why do I need Web3 for? Why do I need a crypto wallet? How am I going to start using a skin or a digital asset? If once we find there's no friction in how we use this and sell those assets, I think the adoption will come easier. For now, we're still trying to figure out. Crypto adoption is still a bit of a friction, but I think the primer driver will be content. Is it a fun game? Because if it's a fun game and we're all playing the game and it's social and there's a very strong sense of community, I think the community comes first. I mean, I got Facebook because everybody. I'm sorry, I'm going back to Facebook, and I'm still calling it Facebook. So I still have a problem with Meta. But I got on Facebook because my friends were on Facebook. So I'm going to play this game because most of my friends are playing this game, or because it's a good game. Once you have the community, then you can start to monetize and tokenize, like you said.
Robby, yes.
I was just going to add. I think another reason that, like for us, we really believe that gamers represent the most interesting constituency of Web3 adoptees or potential adoptees is because a big part of Web3 is being able to give true digital ownership to people. And to give people ownership over virtual items, you have to make a bit of a mental leap, because historically we've never been able to own these digital items. But there is one group of people who very much understand what it means to pay money and buy and collect and use digital items. And those are gamers, because gamers have been doing it for 15 years already. They just didn't realize that they didn't actually own anything, that they were renting it. So what we're doing is we're actually just fulfilling the promise that we've been making to gamers for generations already by actually conferring true ownership.
I think that just one thing on it, which I guess is like a bit of a dichotomy with the whole, this isn't just a gaming but mass adoption across Web3. There's so much focus on you have to educate people in order for mass adoption to happen. People need to understand what it is. They need to understand what an NFT is. If you take out the scary words, then mass adoption will happen. But then there's a flip side where so many projects in gaming and elsewhere, where projects are almost being made where the blockchain aspect or the NFT aspect is invisible. So many projects now you can sign up for with your email address, and you can pay for stuff with your credit card, and things are called in-game assets. And even though you do own it, you might not even necessarily know that you do, because you don't call it an NFT, you call it an in-game asset. It's also whilst there's so much education happening to help people understand it, we're also taking like a couple of steps back to make it invisible to help people on board as well. I just think it's interesting. I mean, it will come eventually that people will then realize, like what Robby said, that they actually own stuff. And it's like, oh, hang on, I've been doing blockchain all the time. Like I didn't even know. Well, this is great. It doesn't feel scary anymore. But at the moment, we're kind of at that intersection where it's like, educate, but also people are trying to do it secretly too.
Right. Do you think, so this new approach, does that involve account abstraction, where you're sort of changing the user interface of these products, where you're sort of hiding a lot of the tech behind a nice user face, and it's all combined there? You've got your digital wallet. It's as easy to access as an email address or just log in. You know, is that an approach? Do you believe in that approach, or do you believe in just giving people access to all the different compartments of this?
I think there are people who believe in the most important thing that we do is we give them ownership. Custody is a separate issue, and in the Web3 world, we talk a lot about self-custody versus, you know, having account abstraction, as you said. And I think gamers actually, for the most part, probably don't really care. I think it's important for us to be true to our Web3 roots, to offer customers a choice. But I think most customers will opt to allow us to custody their assets on their behalf. But as long as we give them the option for self-custody for those sort of power users who actually understand how the technology works, I think then we can pretty much service everybody.
So, Robby, you sort of mentioned, like, gamers have been doing this for about 15 years. Was Fortnite the big breakthrough game when it comes?
No, this would be the traditional MMOs. So think of things like World of Warcraft or EVE Online, when we started to have active in-game economies. And I think that's where a lot of people in the Web3 community got their inspiration. I mean, think of the first crypto exchange, the infamous Mt. Gox, which stood for Magic the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering
Right.
online exchange.
And it was this idea that people who were working on developing this technology did it because they were thinking, we used to play these games, but we never had any way to trade our assets amongst each other because the software developers or game developers wouldn't allow us to. These were siloed walled gardens. And how do we use this new tech we have, which is secure and interoperable, to allow us to transfer these assets?
So, okay, so we're diluting the kind of power of the centralized ownership. We're decentralizing participation in these games, decentralizing ownership and stuff like that. And you mentioned Magic the Gathering, you know, online exchange. MTGOX was that, and you know, very rare cards could be sold for a lot of money and stuff like that. Do you think gaming as a way to escape, you know, escapism? I just want to play my game, and the world of work, as in grinding and earning money, do you think that can coexist, or is there a problem there?
100%, because when I had my first game console, I had an Atari, and it had cartridges. And if you didn't want your cartridges anymore, you could take it to a shop and sell your secondhand cartridges. This is no different. It's exactly the same. It's just that the content is digital instead of physical.
Right, okay.
I think gamers are a good audience for, you know, if the question is, I mean, I don't know about the number billion, but if we're trying to look at users coming into metaverse, gaming and the gaming community are inherently a good place to start or be the ones to do that, because they like being immersed in digital virtual worlds anyway. So if anyone is going to embrace metaverses as such, it is going to be gamers, because it's just one step bigger and further than what they're already doing. So it makes sense that it would come from that audience if it does. The billion number is big. Oh, I mean, I don't know when we'll get there. It's probably the answer.
Yeah, the billion number seems like a high benchmark. Can we get any sort of like metrics or figures of what the number of users are at the moment, and a kind of a breakthrough, a critical mass that's going to lead to mass adoption? Has anybody thought about that, Fabio or Robby?
About 140 million wallets.
So it's 140 million
wallets out there right now.
At the moment.
Yeah.
And they're unique user wallets.
Yes, and of those, I think holding NFTs is like 20 million, something like that.
Okay, well that is
because the NFTs would be how we tokenize playable in-game content.
Right, that's sizable. So do you have any kind of like critical mass that you think there would need to be until we call this mainstream?
It's difficult to say, because when we think about all of those huge user numbers on mobile gaming, for example, the reason we have such huge user numbers is because mobile gaming is incredibly bad at monetization. right? Because of every 100 users who comes into your game, only 2 spend any money. So you need to have tens of millions of users just to be able to meet your payroll. Whereas in Web3, our games tend to have very high retention rates and very high conversion and monetization rates.
Okay. Yeah, because the whole model of ad revenue for like mobile games, it's kind of like it runs its course, you know, at a certain. It's got a certain.
Well, because we're not productizing the customer, we're serving the customer, so it's a little bit different in Web3.
I think cloud streaming will have a big impact on that as well. You know, as Robby mentioned, AAA games at the minute, you can't do them on mobile, or you have to have a mobile optimized version, which people that like playing, you know, big, massive titles just don't do it on mobile. But, you know, the advancements in cloud stream mobile gaming, I think that will have a big impact on mobile gaming as well, because it's opening up a big market for people to be able to use a mobile to play massive titles that at the minute you either have to play a lower grade version or you don't play the game at all.
And this sort of cloud streaming aspect like that can coexist obviously with the Web3, you can log in with your Web3 wallet, access, depending whether it's a Web3 decentralized game. Fabio, I'd just like to ask you a question. Do you think that this whole idea of giving sort of users ownership and stuff like that, do you think that sort of improves their, I suppose, their enthusiasm for playing the game? You know, are they going to play it longer? Is it an incentive?
Straight answer, yes. To add a bit of texture to what we just discussed, just like you have different type of games, AAA games or more mobile independent games, you have different type of gamers, like I mentioned, and there's like very roughly 3 ways to categorize a player. You have the whales, they are very heavy players, they spend a lot of money, they're very active. You have the minnows, they're just, you know, small players, they wouldn't necessarily pay for a mobile game. And then you have the dolphins in between. So in Web3, you can almost categorize those players like that, but also by geographies. And in some geographies during the pandemic, in countries like Vietnam or Venezuela, they were using the play-to-earn model. They were gaming to earn money. So there was a very specific purpose. There was a very specific usage. Now, to answer the question, you know, it depends what the player is looking for. Are the players in some geographies looking to earn money while there is no other way to earn money? And that was a big driver for Web3. And a lot of players coming from India and all these countries, you know, they're very fluent, and they were making more money playing games than being a doctor, practicing the medical profession, for example. It's different in our markets. And some of the players, they want to earn money. Some of the players, they want to be involved in what's called the governance of the game, where the game is going. You mentioned EVE Online, you know, what impact other than my digital assets can I have on the game? Which was the prerogative of the publisher before. But now the players want to have a bit more control of that and be masters of their own destiny. So there's the ownership of the assets, which hopefully will be able to interoperate with other worlds. We're still very early in this. Or we're creating an ecosystem where you have different types of tokens. And a governance token can be a way to actually engage more players and say, you know, you can decide where the game is going. So can I just ask the audience, how many people in the audience would classify themselves as traditional gamers?
Oh, a few.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. And keep your hand up if you're also a Web3 gamer.
Oh, we got a couple.
That's really interesting. Wow.
Oh.
We got one.
Yes. So do you think there's a challenge of education when it comes to this? Like you did touch upon that, Kellyanne. It's educating traditional gamers about this space. Is it a challenge about that, or is it also a challenge maybe on perception? Robby, how do you think traditional gamers are perceiving the Web3 space, gaming space?
I think the problem is it's both, because the perception is based on lack of education. And I think that one of the challenges for us is that there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance for players who have played traditional games and spent money on digital items that they didn't actually own because they believed that they owned them. And so what we're offering them with true ownership is not necessarily something that they can understand until they try it. And it's one of those things that, as everybody here who's dabbled with Web3 and has a wallet and maybe has bought or sold some crypto knows, the first time that you actually sell a digital asset and receive consideration in return, it's a little bit of a magical moment because you're like, oh, that worked.
Yeah.
That's actually really cool. But the feeling that you have is one that you couldn't kind of really imagine until you did it. And then once you do it, you're hooked. You're like, ah, that works. That makes sense. And so for us in the game industry, one of the things that we've observed is that ownership is the ultimate retention mechanism. And retention has been the bane of our existence, particularly in mobile gaming, until now, because users are never loyal. They stick around for, at best 7 days if you're lucky. But, most mobile games have day 30 retention of, a couple of percentage points.
Okay.
Whereas in a Web3 game, even casual Web3 games, you can see day 30 retention of 60% because it's the same psychology. If you own a vacation home, you take all your vacations in your vacation home. You don't go somewhere else because you own a home. That ownership is your retention mechanism.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting analogy. So your vacation home is really in the virtual world, and you have a certain sense of kind of loyalty and incentive to improve it, to maximize it, and stuff like that.
Because it's yours.
That is interesting, yeah. And that is a big hurdle to allow people to actually figure out the virtual space. You can own part of this virtual space.
Yes.
And a lot of people would sort of just see that as sort of marketing and hype. But in a way, if we're spending most of our lives in the digital arena, not so much. It actually is quite important. So let's actually move on to, are there any major AAA games, looking at, say, Activision, Blizzard, Electronic Arts, are they moving into this space? Are they tending to stay away from this space? Is there any kind of approach?
It depends who you talk to. Some, if you speak to, and it also depends what your definition is. If you speak to Epic, they are very kind of, we are not Web3 games and don't really want to be associated with it. But they do use the word metaverse. So, like with Fortnite, they've introduced Unreal Editor for Fortnite, which essentially means users can now use full-scale AAA game development software, and they can self-publish in Fortnite. And Epic's definition is that's what makes it a metaverse, because it's user-generated content, but it isn't blockchain-based, and they would never class themselves as a publisher with or associate themselves with Web3 games. But then you speak to some of the other publishers, Square Enix, for example, or the guys that position themselves at the other end of the scale. If you're going to do a big title or a big drop and you want it to be blockchain-based, Square Enix is your publisher. And then there's people in between. So, and that really, it's something that we're looking at because we're an RPG game for gamers, but we're also thinking about this metaverse open world aspect, whether it's going to have the blockchain and the trading and all of the stuff that a typical Web3 game would have. But that's really going to be quite heavily dictated by which publisher we go with. And we'll not only change our decision of who we go with, but if we go with someone who isn't Web3, then that completely changes your roadmap of rollouts and all of that sort of stuff.
Are users given the option about using kind of the Web3 blockchain-based version, or going for the kind of the centralized model?
Well,
you're not there at that stage yet, obviously.
We are, but we're in a nice position that we've our investment has self-funded our production, and it wasn't secured on the project being a Web3 project or a Web2 project. Now, if you need your publisher to give you the money for your production, then that's heavily going to dictate what you can and can't do. We're kind of free at the minute. We can publish with who we want. I mean, of course, you also don't need a publisher. You can self-publish your game wherever you want. But if you are needing a publisher to give you investment so you can actually make the project, and you want it to be Web3, but you're getting your investment from Epic, then that's not going to work. So.
And there seems to be like a lot of sort of cross-pollination and usage, and a lot of sort of free usage of all these terms: Web3, metaverse, blockchain, and stuff like that. Fabio, do you think that when I think of metaverse, I think of virtual reality. But that's not the only portal into the metaverse. You can do it on a screen. You can join the metaverse on your mobile and stuff like that. But is there a sense that Web3 games are utilizing virtual reality or utilizing that aspect of the metaverse?
So that's a very good question. The terminology of the next internet, It started with Metaverse, then Web3, then Web 3.0, of which Web3 was a subsegment. And now it's about spatial computing, because Apple is just releasing the Vision Pro. So it's the next cyberspace. Is there an element of immersion, of virtual reality or augmented reality? Some games will have that. It's not mandatory for Web3 games to have an element of immersion. You can have an augmented reality game without any tokenization or any use of digital assets, or you can have Web3 a decentralized game or tokenized game without an element of immersion. The fantasy, the dream, is to have both at some point and have an experience. But because it's moving parts, and it also depends on investments from companies, like Animoca. It depends on the blockchain companies going into the space. It depends on venture capital investors, and the money, the capital seems to be going in different places. Depending on the flavor of the quarter.
Okay.
It's been AI this year. It was Web3 before, but for us we have a holistic vision where we have the different pillars. You have the pipes and the plumbing, Web3. You have the getting to the masses, so that's the distribution. You have the money machine, that's your tokenization. So these are the different elements, the different pillars, and we're trying to build, through portfolio construction, for us a Blueverse, basically a holistic portfolio of companies building the different parts of the future of the internet. Animoca doing different things, but it's an ensemble, so different moving parts at different times.
So, Robby, can I just bring you in here? So, at the moment, investment, is it sort of holding back a little bit and trying to watch how this plays out? Has it been affected by, there has been basically a drought in volume in, say, spot cryptocurrency trading, even derivatives have dropped. Has this affected, does the Web3 space correlate with this kind of drought when it comes to the rest of the crypto space? Or is that kind of on its own trajectory?
So I think the biggest impact has been the overall macroeconomic environment. As everybody in a tech conference of any flavor will tell you, funding has dried up completely this year. It's just been, it's a desert out there. Even for the AI folks, it's not as easy as we might think. So I think that has the biggest impact, because of course what we're working on is a relatively new segment of technology, and it requires a lot of R&D and a lot of investment, because what we're building and the games that we build are novel. The gameplay may be based on traditional concepts or traditional game engines, but the Web3 aspects of it, many of these things are untested. And so for that, I think there needs to be investment, and investment has slowed dramatically, and that, I think, slows the pace of innovation.
So this is difficult in a risk-off environment. Kellyanne, do you think,
I was just
going to
say, I think the users as well, it's not just investors investing in projects, but the users that will be the ones spending their crypto, they've been hit by the market too, so they don't have the liquidity that they maybe did at the boom.
Right.
To buy all of the NFTs and in-game assets, people as individuals lost a lot. So, is that?
Yeah, I suppose it's across the board. It's affected the macroeconomic environment. So, we don't have that long left. We've got 5 minutes left. So, what catalyst does Web3 gaming need at this moment in time? Does anybody want to come in first? What is that catalyst?
I think I don't know if it's a catalyst, but I think an interesting thing, because I do some consultancy as well with brands looking to make the move into Web3. And, a couple of years ago, all big brands were asking was, how do we do NFTs? And now they're asking, how do we do gaming? So, I think gaming is worth more than the music and the movie industry combined. And brands know that. And so when they're looking at, maybe they're looking to integrate into a metaverse or whatever it is that they're looking to do, that they're now looking at at the gamification of whatever their brand, how they can gamify their brand. So I think that in itself is, we've kind of focused here on gamers who are already gamers, whether that's traditional or Web3. But I think brand integration will bring a whole new set of gamers, people that aren't gamers already but are brand loyal. And will follow their brand, and then might become gamers, because brands are now looking at how they can do gamification for their audience. So I think that's probably something that might be interesting to watch.
That is interesting. Robby, what do you think about that? What kind of catalyst do you think brands getting that sort of sector to get interested in it? Or do you think that it's still all about the traditional gamers, getting them in, pulling them out of their silos, their Sonys and their Xboxes, and getting them? Or what do you think in that respect?
I think that traditional gamers will gravitate towards Web3 games as the amount of product increases, frankly, because there's just not that much in the way of Web3 games on offer at the moment. And we have to be realistic about the fact that there are probably more new mobile games coming out every day than there are Web3 games coming out this year. Right. Just because it's still relatively early days in our segment of the industry. But I do think that it's an inevitable shift. And as we've seen from recent, more high-profile launches, things that have been on mobile, like NFL Rivals for Mythical, they're onboarding tons of users because they've figured out, what they feel is a novel way to onboard users within the restrictions that Apple has placed in their App Store. And it requires users to go through a few more hurdles between a web-based interface as well as a mobile game, but they're finding some success. And I think as the platforms that we rely on for distribution start to see some of those success stories, perhaps they will maybe be a little bit more embracing of our way of playing games.
This is the obstacle you're facing at the moment with basically
mobile
platforms. And do you think they're discouraged because of the aspect of ownership is kind of going away? They're sort of losing the control, losing their ownership. The onboarding, I suppose there's the KYC issues and all sort of regulatory issues about having like mobile wallets, having Web3 wallets attached to a game. Is that an obstacle, like the kind of regulatory environment?
Their concern is how do they get 30% of everything?
That is their big concern. Okay, so they do not like the decentralization of ownership, and okay, that's going to be a difficult obstacle to. Yeah. Fabio, what do you think is the catalyst that needs to come along, or is there a catalyst, or is there just one, or is there a number of them?
I was going to say the $1 million question. We're all waiting for the watershed moment, for the iPhone moment, and this is it, and there's a before and after that moment. I think in reality it's a bit more complicated, and we see, in increments, different players doing their part. So brands, it's interesting, they have a different time horizon than a venture capital investor or a game publisher. That time horizon is very short, and they're driving the hype. And Nike is creating, this experience, and you have, a Disneyverse experience, and that sort of confuses the masses. Where hang on, like you said, metaverse is just I put on a headset, whereas for some of the people it's more of a long-term play. And so there is a difference in perception. There's a difference in objectives. Very commercial objectives for some, short-term, very longer objectives for some others, and those objectives can be competing. We look at gamers, and some of them are passionate about really building the community, doing it for the players, and they are involved themselves. And this is the people we talk to. This is the people we fund. So when brands come and say, look, we try to do this, well, yes, it brings a certain awareness, but are you going to monetize your users? Not sure. A luxury brand, let's say, Bulgari, how can they monetize their users if they're not Gen Zs or Gen As? They are different audiences. So they're struggling with, they're wrestling with the concept, they're wrestling with their future consumers. And the fact that Web3 within Web3, we'll see emerging new brands, user-generated content. And where is that coming from? Not from the brands. It will be coming from the trenches, from the community.
So I suppose is like, say, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and is it called The Other Side, like their metaverse? Is that an example of what you're talking about? It's sort of, it came from that ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's native to that ecosystem.
Yeah, native. Yeah.
I think also one issue that's really important is to remember that what Web3 is really great at is empowering creators, because that's exactly what Fabio is talking about. And if we could just compare numbers, NFTs last year paid out about $28 billion in creator royalties, and all of that money that's into the pockets of creators. By comparison, Spotify paid out $9 billion of creator royalties, right?
Yeah.
And the difference is, as I mentioned earlier, there are 20 million holders of NFTs in existence. Spotify has 900 million subscribers. So the monetization level and the amount of money that goes back into the pockets of creators is remarkable, whereas it's a well-known fact that in the world of streaming, creators really get nothing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time that's, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but a lot of the time that's lifetime royalties as well. So,
Right.
you know, if you're an artist in the real world and you sell a piece of art, you sell it once and then that's it. Whereas a lot of the time with NFTs that you've created, you get a percentage, 10 to 15% is usually about standard of all secondary sales forever and ever. So you're, as the creator, constantly for lifetime getting benefit to your work, which is how it should be.
Well, as a monetization model, it's a paradigm shift that the incumbents, they probably don't want to entertain it at all.
Yeah.
You know? But here, folks, that does us for today. We're slightly over time. Thank you very much. And put your hands together for our panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.